Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for this session. My name is Spencer Allingham, and I'm the Technical Director at Condusiv for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And today I'll cover one of the most overlooked causes of performance loss when running virtual Windows servers in VMware, and more importantly, how you can easily fix the problem by installing our V-locity software on all your Windows VMs. And I'll have a Q&A session at the end, so if you think of any questions as we're going through, please do feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and I'll do my very best to answer them all. So with that said, let's go ahead and start the presentation. Now, some of you may be thinking, oh, goodness, I've never heard of Condusiv. Who are they? What right do they have to be talking about this stuff? Well, we're actually a 38-year-old software company. I think probably the 12th oldest software company in the world that's still going strong today. And as mentioned, I wanted to introduce you to our V-locity software, which is our patented storage I/O sequentialization and RAM caching technology that eliminates performance problems in virtual environments. Some of our software is OEM'd by some of the biggest players in the IT industry, and I'm sure you recognize the likes of Samsung, Fujitsu, HP, and so on. We've actually sold over 100 million licenses worldwide and have a 90% footprint in the Fortune 500. So that's a bit about us. Our V-locity software has also been available for many years now and is itself used by thousands of organizations all around the world, from small companies to large multinational enterprises, universities, government agencies, hospitals, and so on. Anyway, that really is enough about us. Let's talk a bit about why you might want to consider taking a closer look at our V-locity software for your VMware environment. Badly performing VMware virtual machines can manifest in a number of different ways. You could have batch jobs or reports taking longer than they should, slow databases that can't process enough transactions per minute or per hour, applications that are taking longer than they should to respond. You might even be unlucky enough to have application timeouts or user complaints to the help desk about performance, or even worse, customer complaints. As we rely more and more on our virtualized infrastructures, we really can't accept a situation where we're unable to get all of the performance that we've paid for when setting up our VMware environments. As IT professionals, we really need to ensure that the maximum compute is available at all times, and especially during periods of peak load, and even more especially during the working day when users are more likely to be using our VMware environments. So if you're seeing performance issues within your VMware environment, there could be several causes. One of the most common when running Windows in VMware virtual machines is related to the way Windows moves data to and from the storage layer. Generally, it's really not as efficient as it could be or it should be. And we've had customers purchase the V-locity software even after buying very expensive all-flash arrays, simply because they still needed more performance. Others have been able to defer the purchase of that expensive next level storage simply because V-locity gave them so much more performance from the storage array that they already owned. The good news is that you can easily get better storage performance too, simply by installing our V-locity software on all your virtual machines. Not only will that deal with the inefficiencies in Windows, it will also introduce intelligent RAM caching for your read I/O traffic. Now, before we can take a closer look at the V-locity software, it's important to understand what type of storage I/O traffic performs best with pretty much all types of storage that could underpin a VMware environment, from spinning platter hard drives right up to flash or SSDs. There is a very good reason why storage manufacturers prefer to measure the performance of their storage with larger sequential reads and writes. And that is that this type of storage I/O traffic allows a faster data transfer rate, measurable in megabytes or gigabytes per second. Basically, larger sequential storage transfers mean a faster data transfer rate, and that in turn means better performance for the workloads that you're running in your VMware environment. Take a look at the test results on this slide for an NVMe connected SSD and a spinning hard drive. Of course, the read and write speeds are faster on the SSD, no surprises there. But what about when the storage I/O sizes are small? Smaller storage I/Os mean less data can be read and written per second. And I guess that's okay if you're actually reading or writing only 2K or 4K of data. But what many people don't realize is that the Windows OS inside your virtual machines will often take a larger write and will split it in the background into many more, much smaller I/Os as it sends the data out to the storage. The net effect, of course, is that data is written more slowly than it should be, and this can also slow down the speed at which that data can be read later on. It can have a very real and very negative performance effect on storage-heavy virtualized workloads like SQL and other databases, busy file servers, business information systems, ERP systems, document management systems, and so on. How often have users complained about performance? Traditionally, as IT professionals, we're taught that bad performance is combated by buying more expensive storage hardware, faster switches, and so on. But what many IT professionals don't realize is that the Windows OS itself can actually be tuned to prevent or avoid the slower data transfer rates that these split I/O situations cause. And the easiest way, of course, is just by simply installing the V-locity software on all of your Windows VMs. I should also mention that installing V-locity to all your VMs will only take a few minutes of your time, and it won't cause any disruption to the live running workloads. There are no reboots required to make it work, no complicated configuration. Basically, you just install the software. It's really that simple. And for those who have a larger number of VMs, V-locity also comes with a management console from which you can install the software across your network, again, in just a matter of minutes. In addition to sequentializing storage I/O traffic for greater throughput of data, V-locity also provides an intelligent RAM cache that will allow your applications to be served hot reads at the speed of RAM instead of the speed of the disk storage layer and the network connecting it to the servers. When you consider that server-side RAM is roughly 10 times faster than SSD storage, you can see how that would also be beneficial to the performance of the workloads that you're running in those Windows VMs. It gets requested data to the applications more quickly. And at the same time, your storage layer is working less hard because it has fewer read I/Os that it has to deal with. The cache size is automatic and dynamically sized, and V-locity will never compete for RAM with anything else that you have running on a VM. It will only ever use some of the memory that is being left idle or unused. And because the cache is sitting inside each Windows VM, It provides the shortest I/O path possible to get those read I/Os completed as quickly as possible. By installing V-locity on all of your Windows virtual machines, you will quickly get from this situation where you have small storage traffic that gets further randomized by a blender effect as it passes through the physical ESX or ESXi host, to this, where the storage traffic is much more sequential, so that you can now actually get the performance that you paid for when purchasing your VMware environment and its associated hardware. Even if you have the fastest storage array in the world, does it really make sense to allow the virtualized Windows OS to split storage I/O traffic, dampen its performance, and prevent you from using it to its full potential? Now, I mentioned earlier that we have thousands of V-locity customers all over the world. We also have quite a few customer case studies available to read on our website at condusiv.com. Bell Mobility is a great example. They're a telecoms company in Canada who installed our V-locity software, which promptly replaced their small random storage I/O traffic with larger sequentialized reads and writes. And this gave them SQL report queries that were 3 times faster. No additional hardware required. All they had to do was just simply install the V-locity software on all their VMs. No reboots, no SQL code changes, and no disruption. Just quite simply the ability to process more work in the same amount of time using the setup that they already owned. Another great example is Hancock Regional Hospital. After installing V-locity on all their VMs, they found their patient records loading 3 times faster. So let me briefly summarize what we've been through. First, small random reads and writes to storage mean less data can be transferred each second. And that can be very bad for the Windows OS, application performance, and really bad for your VMware virtualization initiative. It can bottleneck the virtual environment, leading to less productivity and more user or customer complaints. Secondly, V-locity solves performance problems in VMware virtual environments by sequentializing writes as data is being written for greater transfer rates and throughput. And it introduces RAM caching to really boost storage-hungry applications like SQL Server, SharePoint, on-prem Sage ERP, Microsoft Dynamics, busy file servers, and many more. And finally, V-locity is just software. So it can be installed in any Windows VM being hosted in a VMware environment. As long as you have Windows VMs running Windows Server 2008 R2 or later, or on the client side, Windows 7 or later, you can install V-locity. And as I mentioned, there are no code changes required, no reboots, and no disruption to live running workloads, or more importantly, your users. If you want to try the V-locity software for yourself, you can download a copy free right now from our website. In fact, to be honest, rather than taking my word for any of this, I would much rather you install it on all of your VMs and see what difference it can make to your own virtual environment. And just as a couple of tips from someone who has installed this software in many customer environments, I would suggest that you wait 24 to 48 hours after installation to check the results. The reason for that is that this will give V-locity's telemetry algorithms a chance to learn a bit about the workloads that you're running in each machine and start figuring out what the hot blocks of data are that should be in the RAM cache. Also, try to leave enough RAM free to cache with effectively, especially on your more important, busy or VIP servers. If you can leave 16 gig of RAM free, that should be enough to really make the performance fly. But if you can't afford that, leave 8 gig free. And if you can't afford 8 gig, leave 4 gig free. Even that is enough to make a difference. But if you go much smaller than that, you will probably be limiting the results that you would otherwise get. If you would like technical help with the software, get the Condusiv contact details for your region from the Contact Us page at condusiv.com. Let us know and we can quickly get you hooked up with a technical engineer to help with installation, configuring for best results, and even evaluating the results with you. We will help you as much or as little as you feel appropriate. Just let us know. And to say thank you for your time today and for your interest in the V-locity software, we are going to send everybody who's attending a single full V-locity server license worth £400, along with the 30-day trialware, and that's yours to keep running on one of your machines even after the trialware has expired. I would strongly recommend, though, that you install the V-locity trialware on all of your virtual machines when testing, really to be able to see the full power of the software. So let's see if any questions have come through. Hopefully that all made sense to everybody. So Brian's asking, is V-locity installed on the host and the VMs? Good question. So in a VMware environment, you don't install anything on the physical host layer. We don't need to install any software directly onto the ESX or ESXi server. We can do everything we need to do inside those guest Windows virtual machines. So that's where you would install it. And there's a couple of good reasons for that. One, I mentioned that means that our cache can provide the shortest IO path to satisfying read requests where appropriate, but that's also the layer at which writes get split. If you try and prevent those writes from being split down at the ESXi layer, well, you can't, it's too late, they've already been split. So by operating inside the guest Windows VM, that's how we can get the most bang for buck, although I hate that expression. Beat is asking, is V-locity speeding up heavy IO desktop apps? Yes, it does. Basically, any Windows application that's generating a sort of larger amount of storage IO traffic is likely to benefit from this type of technology. And it absolutely does work on desktop OSs or if you're running client VMs in VMware, absolutely, as well as servers. So I hope that answers that one, Pete. Nigel says, hi, does this work with any hypervisor given it is installed on the Windows server, specifically KVM? Great question. I know that I've focused this session very much on VMware, but Nigel, it actually works with any hypervisor, including KVM. A lot of people run things like KVM over Red Hat and then put Windows inside the virtual machines. It's actually hypervisor agnostic. In fact, I have, let's see if I can flip over to this slide. Oops. This slide here. So this shows you exactly where we sit in the storage stack. So down here you have your hypervisor, which could be KVM, Citrix Zen Server, Hyper-V, or of course VMware or something else. It really doesn't matter to us what the hypervisor is because we're installing inside that guest Windows operating system. And because we're operating at this layer and benefiting everything below that layer with less work and more sequentialized traffic, it also means that it really doesn't matter what type of storage you have on the back end either. It could be a tiered SAN, it could be direct attached disks in the physical ESXi host. It really doesn't matter. As long as the storage and the hypervisor is compatible with the Windows operating system that you're running above it, which of course it will be compatible with our software. So Nigel, I hope that answers that. Eamon says, why doesn't Microsoft fix the issue? Could there be a good reason for the splitting of the IOs? That's a great question. And God, there are so many answers that I could give to that, but I have to try and stay diplomatic. The first answer is that Microsoft genuinely have more important things for them to focus on, not the least of which are things like their Azure cloud, the next version of the Windows operating systems, unified communications, their Dynamics platforms, and so on. They seem to be quite happy, and have been since the mid-90s when they first asked us to provide a solution for this. For goodness, it was Windows NT 4. So that's how long we've been doing this stuff for Windows. Yeah, it's they simply have more, shall we say, economically positive things to be working on, and are happy to leave these inefficiencies to be fixed by third parties like ourselves. And as far as splitting the IOs, there is a good reason for doing that, and it comes down to cluster sizes on volumes. Now, by default on an NTFS volume, the cluster size is just 4 kilobytes in size. So it's very easy to see how, when the free space on an NTFS volume starts to become more and more split up into smaller and smaller free space extents, how you get more and more of these split IO situations when you're writing. And that is something that our software can help to prevent by providing an extra layer of intelligence to the Windows write driver so that it can make better choices when it's writing to avoid these split IO situations. Now, you could avoid a lot of these split IO situations by formatting the volumes with the highest cluster size that NTFS allows, which is 64 kilobytes. And that is considered best practice if you're formatting a volume to be used with something like SQL Server, where you know that the average file size is going to be very, very large. That's okay because it doesn't waste much space. But on a normal or a normally formatted NTFS volume with the default of 4K, if you formatted it at 64K, you would be wasting a lot of the space on that volume. So I hope that answers that. There are good reasons for splitting IOs, but the downside of them being split too much is that these smaller storage IO sizes mean a lot less throughput. The storage transfer speeds are reduced when those IO sizes are much smaller. Mohammed says, can I install the software on Linux VMs? Great question. And Mohammed, I'm sorry, no, you can't. The current version of the software is only for Windows VMs. We do have a similar technology for Linux on our roadmap, but I'm afraid I don't have a release date for that. That being said, if you're hosting a number of Windows VMs and a number of Linux VMs in a VMware environment, and they're all sharing the same backend storage, maybe a tiered SAN, for example, if you're reducing the amount of IO traffic coming out of the Windows machines, that by itself is going to put less stress on the underlying shared storage. So you're reducing IO queue depths, you're helping to reduce storage latency, and those Linux machines will be able to take advantage of that additional IO headroom that Windows is now handing back to the environment by default, even without installing the V-locity software on them. So I know that's probably not the answer you wanted to hear, Mohammed, so I apologize for that, but hopefully that makes sense. Now, Izaz says, you said we should have at least 6 gig free RAM. Does that mean velocity will increase memory consumption of VMs? That's another great question. In a lot of cases, you will likely have enough free memory for the RAM caching to work straight out of the box. If you've got at least 4 gigabytes of memory free or unused, all you need to do really is install the software. I would recommend making sure there's a little more memory free on your VIP servers, or the ones that you know are generating more storage traffic. But yes, Velocity will use some RAM. It has to for its RAM caching to work. But it's dynamically sizing the cache in such a way that it won't compete for RAM with anything else that you have running on the machine, including the Windows OS, things like SQL Server, any applications that are running. It's only ever going to use some of the memory that's left over and not being used. And then if you spin up a new process in that machine that requires a new working set of pages, Velocity will automatically shrink its cache, hand pages of RAM back to non-paged pool to make sure that it continually never competes for RAM with anything else that you have running. So I hope that helps. Eamon has followed up by saying, thanks, not a big fan of Windows anyway. So I guess he's much more of a fan of Linux, which is absolutely fine. Linux is a great operating system. Mohammed says, thanks, that's brilliant, you're very welcome. Chris says, for an existing VM environment with several VMs and shared storage, won't fragmentation still be an issue on the underlying disks? That's a great question. It could be. It really depends on how your underlying storage is choosing to store its data. We are not interfering with the storage controller in any way. So if you've got something like a NetApp filer, which uses a waffle file system, we're not going to interfere with that. What we are doing is making sure that the data is moved from the virtualized Windows operating system down to that storage controller in the most efficient manner possible, and eliminating the performance penalty that you would otherwise suffer. What the backend storage does with that data is entirely up to the storage controller. We're simply getting that data down to it in the most efficient manner we possibly can. So I hope that answers that. Now, Simon says, did you run the Atto disk benchmark with and without the Velocity software so that we can see the difference? And I figured that question would come up. So I did add these couple of extra slides here. Now, I didn't include these as part of the main presentation because I thought, you know what, it's probably unrealistic in the real world, outside of a lab test, to expect that all of the read IO traffic would be satisfied by Velocity's RAM cache, as is the case with this lab test. However, if you could satisfy 25% or more of the hot reads at a transfer rate measured in gigs per second rather than megs per second, really that can only be beneficial to OS and application performance. It would also mean that those read IOs satisfied from the cache represent less work for the storage layer. And without Velocity, the read transfer rate of the NVMe connected SSD, you can see this in the chart on the left, it was maxing out at around about 3.2 gigs per second. The read transfer rate of the spinning hard drive was maxing out at around about 224 megabytes per second. You can see that on the left there. With Velocity satisfying all the read IO traffic at the speed of RAM, if you look at that chart on the right, the read transfer rate's now maxing out on both drives at over 11 gig per second. So the cached reads are definitely being served up, roughly more than 3 times faster than the NVMe connected SSD could do by itself on both storage types. So if you've got any kind of storage bottleneck in your VMware environment, really that's got to be good news, right? So let's see what other questions we have coming through. So Nigel says, what happens if you have over-provisioned RAM across your VMs? That's a very good question, and that's really a more intricate choice that you're going to have to make. So in VMware, you have something called VMware ballooning, which is where you can tell a virtual machine that it actually has more memory, and you give it a reserved and startup size. And what happens is you have a number of virtual machines all the same, so you've over provisioned the RAM. If you were to count up all of the RAM that you've told each of the VMs could use, it would be more than the RAM that you actually have available in the physical host. And the reason for doing that really is so that you can have more VMs. You can have a larger number of VMs per host. So there are good reasons for doing that. And what happens is when a particular VM has a greater RAM requirement, it can borrow some that isn't being used from some of the other VMs. Now, of course, we also, for our caching, need to have some RAM to host the cache with. If there's not enough RAM left free in the Windows operating system, if the VMware ballooning driver is allocating a good amount of that RAM, and there really is only a smaller amount of RAM being left free, then our cache isn't going to interfere with that process, but what it would do is shrink right down, even to a zero size if need be, and you wouldn't be getting the benefit from the RAM caching. So my recommendation in that type of scenario where you've over provisioned the RAM, and this goes back to the intricate choices that I mentioned earlier, is figure out which of those machines are your VIP servers. Which of those VMs are the ones where you care about performance the most? And then modify the VMware virtual machine configuration to make sure that you have enough RAM reserved at all times for the operating system, for the main applications that you're running, and some for velocity, so that some memory can still be borrowed away and used by some other VM, but you always have a reservation for that VM to allow the RAM caching to take place, in addition to the requirement by the operating system and the main applications. So I hope that helps. And Nigel, if you want any assistance with that, you are more than welcome to reach out to me directly. The contact details for the EMEA region are on the Condusiv website, on the Contact Us page. Please just call up. They'll get you through to me straight away, and you're very welcome to consult with me, and I'll do my best to help. Okay, let's see if we've had any other questions come through. I think that's all of them covered, and they were fantastic questions, really intelligent questions. I hope I've been able to answer all of them sufficiently. If you have any questions after the session, again, you're very welcome to reach out to me directly, or to any one of the technical engineers on the global team. We've got some very good chaps over in North America, in the EMEA region. We've got chaps based in Australasia, and also in Indochina. So please feel free to reach out if we can be of any help. And yeah, hopefully this has whetted your appetite enough to try it on all of your Windows virtual machines. And please let us know how you get on. We'd love to get customer feedback. So that being said, thank you very much, all of you, for joining me on this session. I hope it's been useful, and I really look forward to hearing from some of you. Take care and have a very good rest of day.